Hi everybody, it's Lydia here. So today I'm doing a video on A Darker Shade of Magic by V. Schwab. I know a lot of people have already read this book, but equally I know there are probably a lot of people who haven't read it yet, so I'm making this video for you. It's going to be totally spoiler free because I just felt like doing a spoiler-free video today. So for those of you who don't know, this is a YA fantasy which takes place on a series of 4 parallel worlds, essentially based in and around our own. Grey London, which is one of the 4 parallel worlds, is meant to be basically our world. It's totally normal, totally magicless, basically what we know of as our world. And then there are 3 others which have magic. First off, there's Red London, which really celebrates magic and loves magic and reveres it. And then you have White London, which basically wants to control magic, and everyone there is all about power, and the people in charge, it's always the people who are the most powerful. And then you have Black London, which is very mysterious, it's not really talked about, and in fact it was cut off from the other parallel worlds for evilness. Ooh. The book follows a character named Kel, who is a blood magician who can travel between the parallel worlds, and Lila, who is a citizen of Grey London who he bumps into one day, and their lives soon become entangled. I gave this book 3.5 stars on Goodreads, but as I think I've mentioned before, I don't really take much note as far as star rating systems are concerned. Although, and I will actually interrupt myself there because I have kind of been converted to them in a way by Marina's over at My Name is Marina's. She made this incredible video just talking about how she rates books, and in it she really described how she uses the star rating system, and it was a really good video. It was really detailed and really precise, and I came away thinking, wow, if I actually used the star rating system like that, then I think I would get along with it a whole lot more. So I will link that in the description below. It's a really great video. I honestly recommend going and watching it, and actually I'd recommend subbing to her completely anyway, because she's a brilliant booktuber and she just makes really interesting detailed reviews. I really recommend checking her out. Anyway, before I saw her video, I definitely didn't get on with star rating systems, and it was pretty much because of books like A Darker Shade of Magic. I did really enjoy this book, however I also had some big issues about it, and so when it came to actually rating it, I was honestly not sure where to put it, because if I gave it 4 stars, that would scream like, I loved this book, it was really great, it was almost perfect. But it would kind of not highlight the fact that I also had some big issues with it. But equally, if I gave it 3 stars, it sort of suggests that I was sort of on the fence about it, that I was sort of okay about it. But it doesn't highlight the fact that I actually really enjoyed reading it, even though I had those big issues. So ultimately, even though Goodreads doesn't acknowledge half stars, I gave it 3.5 stars. But I'm going to break it down for you now so you get more of an idea exactly what I had problems with and what I enjoyed. So for me, the characters were the big win in this book. As I said, it revolves around Kel and Lila, and they make a brilliant duo. Kel is a character who is very set in his ways, partly because he basically acts as a liaison between the Red London royal family and the other world's royal families, and as a result he has this massive responsibility on his shoulders, basically acting as peacekeeper between the worlds a lot of the time. However, he's also very conflicted because even though he was adopted by the royal family when he was a young child, and this has meant he's grown up in luxury and he's very privileged, he's very aware of that fact, but equally he's very conflicted because he doesn't remember where he came from, he's not allowed to ask about where he came from, and part of him kind of feels like a trophy or a tool being used by the royal family, and he often asks himself whether or not they see him as a member of the family as a result of that, or whether he's more just literally a tool that they can use at their own will, and that leaves him very conflicted. So that confliction makes for a really interesting character. Despite that, however great a character Kel is, he pales in comparison to the awesomeness that is Lila. I loved everything about her. She is just amazing. She's this total pragmatist because she's grown up in the gutter with nothing. She's had to fight for her life so many times, and she just is so incredibly refreshing as a character because she doesn't have any moments where she gets worried about inconsequential little things when she's in the middle of a life-threatening situation. I say that because I feel like that happens a lot in YA. I don't think it happens all the time, but I have read a lot of YA heroines who they'll be in the middle of some crazy life-threatening situation, like there's a knife at their throat, but they're worried about what they look like. and it kind of drives me around the bend because that's not realistic. Like, if you've got a knife to your throat, all you're going to be thinking about is actually surviving, not worrying about what you look like. Please, YA writers, stop writing that in YA heroines. It drives me around the bend. Anyway, Lila has none of that, thankfully. In fact, there's this incredible quote about her, which I just have to read you. It had been a long time since anyone had called her pretty. Not that Lila wanted to be pretty. Pretty wouldn't serve her well. And I know it's this tiny little quote, it's not overly important in terms of the book, but it really kind of sums her up, because she's basically this character who really doesn't give a rat's ass what people think about her, what she looks like. She lives in the gutter, she's grown up, you know, wearing virtually nothing decent. She just wears scraps and it's just horrible, but she doesn't care about any of that because she just has to worry about living and surviving, and that for me makes a great heroine. Like, I'm just fed up of people worrying about what they look like in YA. I also love how funny she is. She's incredibly quick-witted, and I don't often really laugh out loud when I'm reading books, but I was constantly cracking up when it came to her one-liners. She's just hilarious, and it was really cool. Like, again, this is something that doesn't happen very often in YA, that you'll have like a fantasy YA like that also has a lot of hilarious lines in it. She just enjoys life, and it's just really refreshing and really amusing, and yeah, she's awesome. I just loved her in general as a character. She knows her own mind, she's adventurous, she's determined, and she's also very cutthroat. I'm not saying that's a great characteristic to have in any way, but it does make for a great dynamic between her and Kel, because he feels guilty about even hurting anyone in the slightest, whereas she will kill someone and not bat an eyelid, and that's just, it's just a really refreshing dynamic. In fact, their whole relationship is really refreshing to see in YA. The best thing about them is that you've got Lila, who is really outgoing, she is very cutthroat, as I say, and then you've got Kel, who is, he likes to keep to himself, he has his own ways, he's worried about hurting other people, and that's kind of a role reversal as far as the male-female relationship in YA is concerned. That doesn't happen very often. I know there are examples, but it doesn't happen that often, and it was just really nice to read that because it was just completely different to what we normally read, and I really liked that. So thank you, V.E. Schwab, for writing this awesome duo. They were just brilliant. And in terms of the characters overall in this book, not just Kel and Lila but everyone, I gave the characters in general 4.5 stars because I just loved everything about them. They were so good. I just want to talk for a second now about scene setting and description. Now, I know this is very much personal preference. Some people love loads of description in the book, some people love hardly any, and in order to kind of find the happy medium, they have to have a sort of middle ground. But I'm someone who definitely loves lots of description. I mention a lot how much I love Lord of the Rings. Half the reason I love that book is the amount of description in that book, and I know that's a reason that a lot of people don't like that book. So I do love my long description, but I tend to be fairly lenient with this because I know that in order to find that happy medium you can't have long description all the time. So I understand if some books, you know, only have a little bit and it's alright. But as far as this book was concerned, I actually felt there was barely any scene setting, and it was a real disappointment. I love the idea of the parallel worlds in this. I think it's a really cool idea. I love the idea of the 4 different versions of the same world, and you can tell that V.E. Schwab has really kind of thought about what's different about them. But I feel like she didn't really convey that to us very well. Every time Kel visited a new world that he hadn't been to before in the book, there was a little bit of description about it, about where he was, kind of comparing it to the previous world. But that was pretty much it, and I felt like there needed to be more description in order to differentiate the 4 worlds, because there is clearly this massive difference, not just in terms of the magic and the worlds, but also in terms of just societal rules and the way people live in these different worlds, and I didn't really feel like that came across very well. Like, for example, I feel like Red London and White London were described in a very similar way, but clearly White London is meant to be much more competitive, there's much more of a power struggle going on, and also it's sort of described as being in decline because they're always wanting to control magic, and magic is constantly fighting against this, and as a result the world in general is kind of falling into decay in a way. And that was hinted at every now and again, and you got the general idea about it, but when he actually visited that world, there wasn't enough description to actually picture that. I ended up a lot of the time picturing similar places in Red London and White London because I just didn't feel like there was enough description describing the two of them. Like Grey London I just saw as our world and just generally grey. Like in my head it was just grey. But Red and White London I just didn't know how to picture differently because there just wasn't enough written about them. So I really hope as this series progresses that we do learn more about those worlds and we do get more description, because I feel that that is something that would be really interesting but we haven't got enough of in this book. So as far as the scene setting and description and just writing style in general is concerned, I gave it 3 stars. Even though I did really like her writing style, the lack of description really let it down for me. So finally we come to the plot, and this really was the crux of the problem for me. The synopsis for this, released prior to release, was very vague. It just generally told us about Kel being this traveller between the 4 worlds and that he got into a bit of trouble. That was basically all we knew. But the way it was written, it sounded really intriguing and it definitely made me want to read it. And that was really very much how the book started and really progressed for quite a long time. It was really interesting, it was very intriguing and dramatic, and it really held my attention probably for about 75% of the book. It was really like building up and you could tell it was gradually building up. But then came the ending, and I'm not going to spoil anything, don't worry, but I was really disappointed with this ending. I will say now, when I read this book I didn't realise it was going to be part of the series. I thought it was a standalone book, and just off topic, but I really want more YA fantasy standalone books because I love series, but standalones are also awesome and I feel like we could do with more of them every once in a while. So YA authors, if someone could write a YA fantasy standalone book, that would be great because I'm really craving one at the moment. Anyway, back on topic, I didn't realise this was a series when I went into it, so I was expecting everything to culminate at the end, and obviously looking back on it now I know it's a series, that obviously wasn't going to happen. But in spite of that, I still felt like the ending was a real letdown. The entire book had been hinting at something happening, and I'm not going to tell you, it's really difficult to talk about this, but the entire book had been building up to a certain point. They kept talking about having to do something, and I'm trying to hint it to those of you who have read this book and not spoil those of you who haven't. But it basically builds up, and you think, you know, it's getting more and more dramatic, more and more exciting, you're waiting for something big to happen, and something happens, but it just fell a bit flat, honestly. I felt like there was no sense of danger there. It just felt like it happened, the thing happened, the climax of the book happened, but it was over so quickly that I never really got into it. This may go back to the description thing. I think perhaps if there had been a little bit more description about this, it would have built it up a bit more. But as it was very much this happened, that happened, then it was over, and I felt very let down by it. Having enjoyed the book the whole way through and really got into it and really intrigued by it, the ending just really felt disappointing, and I was really depressed about that, honestly. I felt really just, when I finished the book I was like, okay, that's the end, apparently. Okay. And I just didn't know what to think because it just hadn't really had an ending. Not a decent one anyway, and that just really let the book down. So I gave the plot 3.5 stars, which may be a bit generous, but I did, as I say, really enjoy the first 75% of it. It was just the ending that fell a bit flat for me. So as I said at the beginning, overall I gave this book 3.5 stars. I did really enjoy reading it, apart from the ending, and I will definitely be reading the next book in the series because as much as anything, I just want to hear more about these characters. They were intriguing enough characters that I want to hear more of their adventures, so I will be definitely reading the next book in the series just to see how they get on, really. But it was overall a really refreshing YA fantasy, and I really recommend checking it out if you're into YA fantasy but just got a bit bored of the stereotypical stuff that you find in YA, because there is only so much you can have of that. So I really recommend checking this out if you want something a little bit different to the norm. Anyway, that's it for me today. If you have read this book, let me know in the description below what you thought about it, because I've heard a lot of mixed reviews. Some people love it, some people really didn't like it, so I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Anyway, I'll be back in soon, but until then, bye!